Order the special meeting of the Dudley-Charlton Regional School Committee. Today is Monday, June 11th, 2018. We're at the Shepherd Hill Regional High School, and it is 4:05. And I am pleased to report that the Interim Superintendent Search Committee has concluded its work and has recommended the following candidates to be brought forth for an interview with the full school committee. Mr. Alan W. Himmelberger, Superintendent, Blackstone Millville Regional School District. Dr. Edwin Malvey, retired superintendent, who most recently served as interim superintendent of Spencer East Brookfield Regional School District. And Dr. Christine Nash, retired, who will conclude a position of interim superintendent of Oxford Public Schools. I take the opportunity to thank Mr. Joe Petrozak and the members of the search committee for their participation in this process and for giving their time during several nights and interviews. Based on that work, I am confident that these candidates brought forward will be exceptional. And welcome.
Thank you.
And before we start firing questions at you, I'm going to have the members of the school committee introduce themselves, and then you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure, absolutely.
Okay.
I'm Catherine Cabal, I'm from Dudley.
Hi, Kath.
Jamie Terry from Charlton.
And
Hello.
I'm Pauline O'Corn from Dudley.
Nice to meet you.
Mary Ann Tossi from Charlton.
Hello.
Elaine Rabbit from Charlton.
Hello again.
Nice to see you.
Stephanie Reed from Charlton.
Hello.
I just interject, Mr. Petrozak had a death in the family, so he won't be here tonight.
I'm sorry to hear
Okay.
that. Well, thank you. First of all, I'd like to thank the committee. I've sat in your chair before, so I know what it's like on the other side, having been a school committee member for a regional school district for about 15 years. I think we went through 4 superintendent searches in that 15 years, so it was pretty interesting. One of our favorite questions always, because of our location, was whether or not the reason that they were selecting our district was because we were the last stop before the bridge. And so, while we didn't ask it that way, it certainly was in our mind, and it became, I think, more of a question for us because one of our candidates in one particular interview actually brought it out, but thank you. Thank you for inviting me here this afternoon. I welcome the opportunity to share my experiences with you, and I'll give you a summary. I certainly know that you've read my resume, and certainly those who sat on the interview committee last week had an opportunity to hear a little bit, but let me go back and tell you that I've spent my entire career, 40 plus years, in public education. And I think when you get to this point, you have 3 candidates, all very experienced. I think really it comes down to fit, right time, right place at this particular time. So what I'd like to emphasize for you is probably what I saw as a good fit for me. I've worked in all of the positions in education. I was a late bloomer. I spent 20 plus years in the classroom. So when I talk about experiences and understanding of what teachers and staff go through when we ask them to change, I think I have a very comprehensive understanding of that. I probably lived through every change there ever was in the late 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. When I decided to make the move and to become an administrator, I spent about 5 years as a building level administrator, and I think, as I mentioned the other night, when you've walked in the shoes of a building administrator, you have an understanding differently than if you've never done that. So that's one thing that I bring to the table that may be somewhat different. The other thing that I think connected for me when I looked at your strategic plan and some of the things that you're undertaking are my experiences in a leadership level with curriculum, as both a director of curriculum and then an assistant superintendent of curriculum. My love of educational leadership. I think part of being a superintendent, whether it's interim or whether it's permanent, is in addition to being a manager, in addition to being someone who's a political leader, first and foremost, you are the chief educational leader in the district. And I have had quite a bit of experience in many of the areas that you are undertaking, project-based learning, as I talked about, the extension of vertical alignment in curriculum and the need to look at some of the new things that are happening as a result of the framework changes, both in history and in other areas, the accountability changes that are happening on the statewide level next year when we start looking at how they'll determine district accountability. So all of those experiences, I have a very broad, rich background, and I think that that's a particularly good match. And finally, I've sat in your shoes for a number of years as a regional school committee member. So it's those experiences, I think, comprehensively that probably, in my experience, probably make me a good fit. But that's what you'll determine.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay, Kathy?
Hi. My first question, how do you keep the school committee informed? In particular, what is your strategy about issues that a responsibility is yours, but that the school committee should be interested in?
I've always worked through the chair. It's been my experience that I first establish a relationship with committee members as part of my entry plan. I would ask to meet with all of the committee members individually and ask some very basic overlapping questions. But one thing that I have always done is to work closely with the chair. And as the chair directs with respect to how information gets filtered out to the committee, some chairs, when I speak with them, will say, please send something out via email or whatever other means to all members. I ask you to do that. Others would rather not do that. So first, it's establishing that working relationship with the chair of the school committee. Secondly, as you know, there's lots of information that sometimes circulates out there. School districts tend today via social media to be a ripe, fertile ground for a lot of wrong information to circulate. And so I have always sent, usually it's text messaging today, so it depends on the chair and how he or she would like to communicate, for me to give a heads up. Heads up, you may hear about this. Heads up, this is something that you should know or be aware of just in case it's out there. And sometimes, quite frankly, it's the school committee members who will send me a text and say, I've heard this out in the field, or this is out on social media, that kind of thing. So it's a pretty open, ongoing kind of dialogue with school committee, particularly via the chair, when either issues arise that you should be informed of or whether you should not be. The one thing that I would say that you don't want is to be ever caught off guard. I think the last thing that you want as a school committee member is to be the last person to know. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
The Dudley-Charlton Regional School District 2018 through 2021 Strategic Plan Portrait of a Graduate just came out, and it details an initiative which embodies an Everybody Matters motto across the district. Can you please explain how you plan to ensure that every child, every teacher, and administrator is supported in every way he or she needs for success for the upcoming year? And if you'd like to give examples of this and how you've accomplished this through your professional career, they're welcome.
I think first and foremost, the budget is the chief vehicle for instruction in the district. And so without having that in place and without having a substantial budget that would support all of the initiatives that you have, that's part of the chief job of a school committee who approves the budget, but also as the instructional leader of a superintendent and his or her administrative team to ensure that you have a budget that would support all children and the success of all children. So that becomes, I think, a chief factor, and when that is missing in a district, then in all honesty, all kinds of things can happen with respect to success for all students. The second thing is ensuring that the message that you communicate is part of your core beliefs, and my beliefs have never wavered as an administrator and as a teacher, and they have been about two things: equity and excellence. Equity meaning that all students, without any barriers, should have equal access to all opportunities. And sometimes we do put up barriers to students and their success. So sending that, communicating that to your staff, to your administrative team, to all of those stakeholders, that this is what you value, these are your core beliefs, is critical. Thirdly, it is being the instructional leader, being the educational leader, ensuring, working with your administrative staff, working with your teaching staff, working with all of your support staff to ensure that they are heard, to ensure that when they have issues or challenges, that you as the superintendent work with them to try to break down those kinds of barriers. One of the things that happened many years ago in our district when I was superintendent in Hanover was the challenge we had to ensuring that all really meant all. Part of it was two pieces to this. One was the way that we were offering our programs in special ed, being too exclusive of students and access. And the second one was the way we were offering on the other end our advanced placement programs, because we had too many prerequisites that basically disqualified so many students from having access or choice. And so we set about to make some changes programmatically in SPED. We instituted some changes, but along with that came some direct work with our staff around ensuring that sometimes you can change the structure, but the beliefs don't always go along with that. So we had to step back for a minute to say, if we're going to change the structure of how we do our business and hope that that has a positive impact in this area, in this case it was special ed and access, maybe we need to step back and look at the belief structure that people hold first. And so we worked in tandem with that. I can give you another example of how I did that, but I'll stop at that point, hopefully. I gave you two examples.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
How important to you are community ideas and parent community input into the district decision-making? How will you facilitate the flow of information from the district, parents, and community? How will you facilitate the flow of ideas and critical feedback from the parents and other citizens back to the district?
I think the first premise is that you have to establish an atmosphere that is inclusive. Parents can tell right away in a short period of time whether you value what they say. It doesn't take them long at a meeting to know whether you are putting them there because you have to, as opposed to you want to. So I think sending that message, and that happens in a number of ways. I think the best way is really face-to-face meetings with as many groups of people that you can, both formally and informally, where people know that you're accessible, that you're a listener, that you're someone who values what they say. As I said the other night, the reason we're in this business is because of parents and students. They are our product. That's the chief reason we're here, and sometimes you have to remind yourself of that at all levels, from a classroom teacher all the way up to a superintendent, when you get exasperated at times, and it happens. Sending that feeling to people, I think, is critical. And then it's all kinds of mechanisms that you have today at your availability, at your fingertips, if you will. Formal and informal, breakfast meetings, advisory board. When I was superintendent in Hanover, I had two things. I had an advisory board that was made up of parents, and then I also found that a lot of parents didn't have the time to commit to a monthly meeting with the superintendent. We couldn't fit that in everyone's schedule. So I arranged the breakfast club that would meet informally once a month at a restaurant. Whoever showed up, showed up. And we just talked about everything and anything that was on the agenda, on their agenda. It wasn't my meeting, it was for me to kind of get a sense or a lay of the land. Setting up, to facilitate the flow, I think you certainly need to establish regular routines and regular types of meetings. Attending events, reading information that's out there, certainly, is another way of understanding what parents value or their views are, whether they are accurate or misinformed because of misinformation. And to facilitate feedback, there are so many ways today that we can do that. Today we are completing a search in Oxford for our elementary principalship, and so we're using, to facilitate feedback from parents, we're just using Survey Monkey, so that people can just simply go in, log in, and give us a sense of the likes or the dislikes of candidates. So there are so many mechanisms today that are available that make it much easier, that the individual doesn't always have to be in front of you for you to be able to communicate and get information back and forth.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You ready?
I am. It sounds like this is a multiple-part question.
It's a multi-part question.
Okay.
What similarities, if any, do you believe there are between being a superintendent of a school district and a chief executive officer of a major corporation? Describe some of the steps that you would take every day to ensure greatest effectiveness of organizational operation, and how would you define whether you had been successful by taking these steps?
You are the CEO of a multi-million-dollar business. The difference is you answer to almost everybody in both towns. And everybody certainly has an opinion, and a valued opinion in many instances, although it certainly may not be always what you would hope. So first and foremost, the superintendent's role is similar to a CEO because I think you have two areas that are similar. You are a manager. You have to ensure that operations run smoothly. From the transportation issues that you might deal with at the beginning of the school to ensuring that whatever the budget reflects, whether it's reductions or additions, are appropriately accommodated for, to outsourcing special ed transportation if that's something that you do in your district or had made the decision to do. So without ensuring that happening and the safety of all of your staff and students, then nothing else can usually occur. So first and foremost, you have to be an effective manager. I have had experiences, more than I care to, with respect to being a manager. When I was superintendent of schools in Hanover, I worked with the town to collaborate, and we basically gave over the facilities and maintenance operations to the town. So instead of us delivering our own services through custodial services and maintenance crew, we basically were the receiver of services through the town. So that required that I needed to negotiate out of contracts, as well as to work with the town manager, the Board of Selectmen, to develop job descriptions and to actually outline an organizational flow chart that would work for the town and the school district. So that's an operations piece, critical to a district. You also have to be very strong in the political area. I think much as a CEO is a good politician. And more than ever today, particularly with some of the nuances that accompany regional schools and the advocacies that we generally have to undertake because we're kind of thrown out there as a region with sometimes not a lot of financial support. You need to be strong in that area. You need to be politically savvy about where the landscape lies with respect to both towns, and particularly in regional districts. Each town is usually a little bit different. My experience, both in their capacity to support financially a budget, as well as their values could be very different and what they believe. And then the other piece that I think is somewhat different, while a CEO must have that knowledge base around whatever it is he or she leads, for me, the most critical piece is always as the instructional leader or as the educational leader. And that's what separates a lot of superintendents. They're very good at management and operations. They're extremely good at the political piece. But they simply do not have the strength of educational leadership, instructional leadership. And that is critical if you're going to move a district. You asked about steps that I have, I think, created with respect to the effectiveness of the organization as a leader. I have reorganized and restructured organizations as a result of some of the shortcomings that we found, whether or not we had appropriate distribution of our talent in an organization or whether or not we had people fulfilling the positions that we needed. When I was superintendent in Hanover, I did not have the luxury of having a curriculum director. So while I could not do all of the duties, I assumed the leadership role in ensuring that whatever we had in our strategic plan, I was able to ensure that we had stakeholders who could implement that, and as long as I supported them with the resources. Again, not the most effective model and not a model that I would want to have over a long period of time, but I was able to do that. Define success. Success is student outcomes. Ultimately, it is about students. Why we're here is about students. And to measure our success as adults, it's about what happens with students. There are lots of ways for us to measure that. A viable, strong district should have multiple measures to evaluate student success. And I think as part of your self-examination, when you develop a strategic plan, oftentimes you look at that. How do we define success? And then how do we evaluate our success? And so I think it's critical that we look at that and say, well, we can put all of these things in place. What has it done ultimately for our students? Are they better 2 or 3 years later than they were when we started? You're welcome.
Still writing.
That's okay. I was still writing that question and hope that I got all 3 parts.
It's nice to see you again, Dr. Nash.
Yes, thank you.
My question is, tell us how you prepare your budget for the school committee. Explain your process and share your experiences and how you work with the Budget and Finance Subcommittee, town administrators, town finance boards, and Board of Selectmen.
Well, as you know, excuse me, having gone through this, the budget is a very long, intensive, iterative process. I take my lead generally from the school committee. Back in the early fall, around October or so, at a meeting, I generally ask the charge from the school committee as to what type of a budget the committee would like me to build, whether they would like me to build a level services budget, a level funded budget, or an additional needs budget, an educationally sound budget, as some of us call it. Once I get that directive from the school committee, then it's my charge, along with all the administrative team, and at their level, working with their staff, to begin to develop that process. So let me use what happened in Oxford this year. The charge from the school committee was to build a level services budget, which simply means, as you know, if I open the door next year, all the services are the same. We don't lay off any individuals, and all of our programs stay intact. That cost increase was reflected at a little over $1.1 million for us to do that. In doing that, and in having the discussions as part of the process with the town manager and the director of finance, it was evident after a period of time that the level of support that we would get from the community, and in this case from the town finance director and the town manager, would not be equivalent to a level services. So part of that process is having those early on meetings. In Hanover, I called them the state of the fiscal health of the town of Hanover meetings, when I would go to the town manager and the director of finance early in the fall, once I got the directive from the school committee, and say, George, can you tell me about what's happening in the town? And we would have those honest discussions about what he saw, what the issues were, what the challenges were on the town side. So once that happens and I get a sense of the lay of the land, and in this case for Oxford, for us it was to develop not just the level services budget, but listening to the town manager and understanding I also had to be realistic and be ready and have something in place that was more of a level funded budget or something even in between. So that became the directive for the building administrators, and they, working with their staff, developed areas that they felt that they could cut if they had to. Because we weren't talking about an additional needs, we weren't adding new things. At the very most, we were probably going to get a level services budget. So the process that takes us through about November or so. And then in the case of Oxford, in December, the school committee received a very hefty budget book with all of our recommendations. And I take very seriously the job that the school committee does, because it's one of the only jobs under ed reform that they still have in addition to hiring a superintendent, and that is overseeing and developing a budget. So it's important for me to give school committee members all of the information for them to make informed decisions. So in their packets, when we would look through each of the schools, they would have enrollments, both current and future, and know the impact of if we were to say to you we were going to eliminate a grade 1 teacher, for example, here's the impact. So you could make an informed decision. If we say that we're eliminating our STEM or STEAM program, are we doing it at both the secondary level, middle school and high school, or do we have a break? Does that make sense? So in addition to just putting information, it's rationale and explanations for school committee so that they can then say to us, back to the drawing board, please. Can you bring something else back that has a little less impact? Don't like the large class sizes at the elementary. Please don't eliminate the STEM or STEAM program that you have. And we would go back to the drawing board. So it's an iterative, ongoing process until such time that they are as comfortable as they can be. And then it becomes a public discussion. So that all stakeholders. Prior to that, there's lots of things that happen. Generally, I involve some discussions if I know that before a public hearing to certify the budget, where all of the unions who are involved in any way impacted would know that prior to it going public. Part of the caution, I think, that I've learned over the years is that you don't want to go public and scare people before you absolutely know that that's going to happen. So I'm very conscious about that and trying to ensure that we balance that fine line of when do you let people know and when you don't. Ultimately, the budget process concludes with the vote at both of the town meetings. In our case this year, we went for an override, and that override, unlike yours, was not successful. So I know how much is involved in that because I've been involved in overrides before. And getting that information out, then if that's the case, we needed to back up and start our political campaign for this override sooner than later, and that oftentimes is a challenge. So I think that's something that the committee probably learned going forward, that they would have to back up their process and start it a little bit sooner. But it is basically in October. For our case, it's May, town meeting, and when that vote comes or the override is approved, then your budget is done. But it's an ongoing process and an iterative process.
Our past two superintendents made sure that they were known to our students and were in the schools and at activities. I know that being an interim could possibly make that difficult, but it is important to represent this district, and I was wondering if you had a plan for how to be connected with our students.
Sure, thank you. That's a great question. One of the things that I do very simply is I have a great administrative assistant, and she schedules everything in. So what she does is, for example, month of June, we look ahead, and she puts everything in. So as you know, as the year concludes, there are lots of things going on, field trips, school events like field days, field trips, awards, and all of that. So that's the first thing. We try to schedule those in. The other thing that I do is I also schedule time to be in buildings. One of the things I learned a long time ago from a veteran superintendent when I became one, if you don't schedule it, it doesn't exist. If you think in a week you're going to get into a building, there are so many things that will stop that. So we actually develop a schedule for the entire year where we book walkthroughs in every building. Even at a 90-minute or a 60-minute clip, once a week, you're in a different building every single week, and we just rotate those through and make sure. The other thing that we do is special presentations to school committees. I'm sure that you do these also, but I make a point of ensuring that I, as well as school committee members, have an opportunity to see some of the things that are going on and make sure that we have students present those things. So there's special presentations. Again, they rotate through at each school committee meeting where each of the schools are responsible for coming in, and principal selects what it is that they want to present. Thirdly is I am a sports person. In fact, right now, as I leave you, our boys are playing in the first round. They're #1 seed, the varsity baseball team, and I hope to get at least a half hour before my school committee meeting at 6 o'clock at the high school. So I attend those. I was a former coach. I coached varsity girls basketball for many years. I'm a great sports lover. It's great when you have an office that's in a school. Currently, I'm not. And when you have that, I used to have all kinds of opportunities when I was in Freetown, Lakeville, because the offices were in the school. You could just take that run through there. Now, much to the chagrin of the probably the high school principal, because I was always walking through talking with people along the way. But you have to plan. I guess my answer to you is you need to schedule them. If you don't schedule them, it's so easy for so many other things to interrupt. So by doing that, you get out to those things. And again, having a strong administrative assistant who just goes ahead, puts it in the calendar. You do that. This morning at 8:45, I was welcoming the Oxford Dudley Chamber of Commerce because they're playing a golf tournament today, and their proceeds give scholarships. So that's where I was then. So try to do those kinds of things. But again, recognizing that there are some limitations, obviously.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Round 2, would you like a water? Would you like any water?
That would be great.
Yeah,
Someone get
that's
some
what I
water.
was thinking, Sam.
Some water,
Sam.
because it's a lot of talking.
Oh, I have an audience behind you now.
I didn't want to interrupt, but I was thinking that.
Yes, it's
We're gonna have
dry.
to get her water.
Thanks so much.
Well, all set.
No, we're all set.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you. Okay?
I am ready.
Okay. Control is an important element in managing a school district. How do you manage being in control without being overly controlling?
Oh, what a great question. So, my belief is called directed autonomy. Part of my job, so the directed piece as superintendent is that you're charged with ensuring that the vision of the district gets implemented. That's something that is critical. The vision, which is outlined for you in this case in your strategic plan. The autonomy piece, however, is that once the clarity of what that vision is out there, so that all of the stakeholders, in this case, the first level being your administrative team, are all on the same page because they understand that, then the autonomy comes because it's not my job to ensure that it happens at the building level. So I think part of the time that we lose our focus in education is because we're moving in too many directions. That we have people who aren't on the same page, who aren't rowing the same way, whatever. So clearly, I believe in that. As a former building administrator, while I'm certainly aware that the buck stops with the superintendent of schools, I certainly want to make sure that the building administrators have the tools that they need, the resources that they need, and clearly understand where the district is moving, so that, again, we're all on the same page. You're welcome.
I believe that a positive outlook, strong energy, and constant attentiveness makes a leader successful. I expect the interim superintendent to bring each of these attributes to the table every single day for our students and staff. What attributes do you believe make a successful leader, and how can you bring them to the district?
Energy, attentiveness, and being positive. I could say very proudly or casually or boast that I have all of those, and I think I do. I'm very attentive to detail. That's part of who I am. If you looked at my plan, it is, you can see that, I think. Probably the former English teacher in me comes out sometimes to a degree, so I apologize in advance for that.
It's fine with me. I have a reputation for that on this committee.
So I'm someone that's a little anal, as they would say about that. However, it's just who you are. It's your personality. I think when we talk about fit, it is sometimes who you are as a person. I am, and have always, I think people would say to you, if you spoke to anyone in Oxford Public Schools who I have had contact with in an ongoing manner, they would tell you that I don't approach things in a negative way, even though it might be a negative situation, that I am personable. I say hello to everybody. I'm not a superintendent who walks in the morning and doesn't say hello. That's just who I am. I have conversations on a daily basis with the first person that you meet in my central office who asks me every time about my cats. And that's just the daily conversation. So it's just who you are. And when people know you're approachable, then I think that puts them in a more relaxed atmosphere and a more trusting atmosphere to many, in many degrees.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We think we have excellent candidates. How can you convince us that you are the person for this position?
Well, I happen to know one of the candidates. And I know the other one only because he was the superintendent in Oxford. So I think I would say this. Relevancy. Relevancy and curriculum leadership is critical, as I said to you. That probably distinguishes me to some degree. Whether or not all of these candidates have been classroom teachers as long as I was before they moved into a position, as I did not mention, but it certainly is in my resume, I taught at both the middle school and high school level. I was, as I said, a late bloomer. Whether or not they have walked in the shoes of a building administrator before, to me is critical. Again, don't know if either one of them has. Whether or not, though, as importantly, they have led a district as the instructional leader is even more critical in my eyes. As I indicated, lots of people are good managers, lots of people are great politicians, but the bottom line to move students and to ensure success for all students is your philosophy, belief structure around education and around being current in instructional practices. If you're asking your administrators to do something, if they are asking their staff, you better know about project-based learning. You better have more than a working knowledge or a general understanding of it. Not that you lead it in the hands-on way. You have a curriculum director who will do that. But you better understand what you're asking them and all of the ramifications of that if it doesn't happen. Or when it happens, what are some of the things that you would need to know and anticipate? So I view myself as being extremely strong in that area. I have always been, it's been my first love after I left high school administration. And it remains. Unfortunately, as a superintendent, you don't oftentimes get to have those kinds of educational talks. So those things distinguish me probably. Certainly my regional school experience, but again, on all sides, as I've said before, I didn't just lead a regional school district. I worked in a regional school district, and I served as you on as a school committee member. So I think I understand from all levels the nuances of regional school districts, both their idiosyncrasies, their peculiarities, their unique things that they undergo and no one else, no other public school district undergoes. So those are some of the things.
Okay. There are many things to think about as a superintendent. As a superintendent, what are some of the things that keep you up at night when you think about education, public education, and the direction that it is going?
Adequate resources, number one. And then the second piece of that is ensuring that all students get the very best that we can provide for them. As I said earlier, the budget is your chief instructional tool. It's the way that a district moves forward, and without adequate resources. So that is extremely troubling. Adequate resources translates into staffing, having appropriate staffing. It translates into impacting class size. It translates into having the resources for new programs that you feel very strongly about that you need to bring in or you want to bring in. So without that, Without those things, many times you're treading water. In many districts, unfortunately, you're going backwards because in many districts, the resources via budget and increases are not significant or sufficient enough for us to even maintain a status quo. So I lose lots of sleep about that. I don't lose sleep if I know the decision is about students. I've had to make decisions that, as many superintendents have, I'm sure, in their careers, about very involved personnel issues. And the way I can sleep at night is if I know when I balance the table that that decision is always about what's in the best interest of students. And so while you lose some sleep prior to, when I finally make that decision, I move forward with it. So certainly having a crisis in a district is always significant, whatever that crisis looks like, whether it's a student death or whether it's a crisis because of a budget or a crisis because of what's going on, quite frankly, outside of your realm and beyond your control on a town level or whatever. Changes in staffing at a town level can impact school districts, we know. So while I lose sleep about those too, and there probably isn't a time when a superintendent goes home at night and isn't thinking about something. That's the reality, you know, of it. It becomes more and more complicated as you move up the ladder, but quite frankly, at every level, the building principal has that same level of anxiety. It just gets magnified at the superintendent's level. And my number one thing that I always worry about, I am probably as happy and more happy than my staff used to be and my administrators when the last day of school comes, because I am so concerned through that 180 or 184 days about the safety of my students and staff that I finally go, phew, okay, Mom, okay, Dad, they're yours now, at least for the summer. And I remember, you know, a lot of times school districts will have those waving goodbye parties. In my town, in Rochester, we had someone who famously led the band, if you will, at the elementary school and was known for 30 years to do that. Well, we used to lead the band a little bit in Hanover at the central office because when my last bus rolled on the last day of school, I just let out a little bit. It was just a different feeling, that at least for that period of time. So that's probably the thing that keeps me up, that general sense of safety and well-being, because all of us know that at any given moment, something can happen that can change everything. And while we don't wish for that, it would be a rare superintendent in his or her career who has not experienced that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Special education is a particular challenge because of the complexity of rules, laws, service needs, and student and parent concerns. When you assess the effectiveness of your special education programs, what are some of the criteria that you use? How have you worked with the CPAC in your past districts? Tell us about a problem or challenge you have addressed involving special education and how you work this out.
Again, you would measure the effectiveness of your programs the same way that we measure the effectiveness of our regular ed programs. You would look at where students are when they begin in the program and where they are when they end in that program. In many instances, it happens over a period of years because students are in a particular type of program for a period of time. I'm a strong believer in creating as much as you can in district programs for a lot of reasons. One, I think we have some very strong, valuable resources in our staff. Two, I think putting a young student in particular on a special ed van and sending them off for a period of time for a lengthy trip sometimes can be detrimental. Having said that, the caveat often is that sometimes we don't have a cohort of students to develop a particular program. So when you look at your programs on a yearly basis, which I've always done with my PPS director or SPED director, we evaluate where we are, the number of students that we might have in a program at that time, who is coming into a program, what are some needs that we have identified. Let me give you 2 examples of what happened, one this year and one when I was in Hanover. This year, we saw some needs emerging from our schools are structured similar to your schools in that we have a pre-K1, we have 2 4 schools. At the end of 4th grade, we saw a cohort of students who were coming out of the program who really needed a very different program than what we were currently offering at the middle school, which was primarily an autistic program. The students who were coming out identified were emotional ED-BD students, and so we sat and looked at first the structure of the program we currently had at the middle school, whether or not that structure could change or be inclusive of the students who were coming into the program, and then if it couldn't, what did we have to do? What needed to change? So you need to examine programs every year. They don't stay the same. Our students move, and students who come in get identified. So having meetings, and I have weekly meetings with my PPS director to have those kinds of discussions as the time comes near, so that we're always in the loop and we know what the impact is going to be on a budget and also what the impact might be on staffing. At Hanover, it was a little bit different. I had a long-running program at the high school that had been a developmentally delayed program. But those students were no longer in the pipeline, and our students were changing dramatically, and we were seeing more students identified in the autistic spectrum, Asperger's spectrum. And we were building a new building at that time, so we had the opportunity to design classrooms to meet the needs. So part of the discussion needed to happen with the longtime SPED teacher who had been there, knowing that the change was going to come forward as to what kind of a physical structure her room needed to look like to accommodate some of the life skill requirements for students. So important to make sure that your programs reflect the current needs, but also that you look at the future, that you look at what is coming up. And when you have a regional school district where, in essence, students feed in, more important to have those conversations so that what you see in both of your towns, in both of your elementary schools as they go into the middle school, but more importantly as the middle school feeds into your high school, that those structures are in place to support the programs that are absolutely critical for special ed students, and doing some future forecasting for that.
Can you follow, I'm going to
Sure.
just follow up. Can you speak to your work with CPACs in your 2 towns?
Yes. Okay. In Hanover, I met regularly with the CPAC, so although the meeting was run by the PPS director, I was always there in attendance at those meetings. It's a little less formal in Oxford. They don't meet on a regular basis, but the CPAC president and I have had a lot of conversations. He recently served as the member and representative on our search committee for our Barton Elementary principal search. Being in communication with them is critical. One of the things that we did in Hanover, which certainly did not rise to the level of support of CPAC, was to outsource sped transportation. And as you can be well aware, these individuals had developed long-standing relationships with my drivers, but unfortunately the concern that we had was related to some of the issues around suitability of drivers at that point in time, and I'll leave it at that. So it was a long process to engage them in the conversations around why this needed to happen without labeling or without demeaning in any way all of the work that the drivers had done over all of the years, because they were extremely dedicated. And so that was, when you talk about the political piece that a superintendent plays, that took a lot of work on not just my part, but my business administrator, who was also involved and as part of her job oversaw sped transportation. and the school committee members who were very much in support of that and how we needed to put a plan in place that did that. We were successful. And while I can't say that every single PAC member was on board, they had all of their questions answered. And I think what we recognize is there would be some individuals who weren't going to always agree with the decisions that we made. But again, I had to err on the side of what was best for students. And that was the best decision, to outsource our sped transportation because of some of those areas that we had identified as real concerns for us with our drivers. So involving them and engaging them and knowing that sometimes their concerns are extremely legitimate and very personal. And one of the things that I'll just end by saying, I have always made a practice of meeting with any parent who calls. I don't refer parents back. I certainly find the information, but generally when parents call and they want to meet with the superintendent of schools, it's because in their eyes they've gone through the process and they feel that they're not getting an answer that they want. And I have, over the course of my career, met with a number of special ed parents, both about programming for their individual students that they felt wasn't effective, as well as just questions they had about the way the district was moving forward and what they had heard. So that's another way of ensuring that what they hear is the real information and truthful and accurate.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay. How have you supervised an administrator or teacher who was having trouble managing a school or a classroom, and what have you done about it? And then the second part of that is, I know that being an interim could make this a difficult task, but how would you approach this type of issue?
Okay. Well, it's not a difficult task if you find out that something has happened that is inappropriate. It's a task you take on no matter who you are. I unfortunately had that happen to us in August of this past year when I came into Oxford with a staff member. So that process went through the appropriate format with respect to what needed to be done, and it led forward with a intent to dismiss letter. That's a rare occasion that you have that, quite frankly. But it was one that was brought to our attention. It was a pretty serious issue, such that you can't overlook it. I don't care who you are. So first and foremost. Secondly, I also inherited some concerns around an administrator in the district. And while I can't get into the details of those, you, again, coming in as the interim, in some districts, you might get bombarded with all of the issues and challenges. And when you put together an entry plan where you spend a lot of time listening, and then you take what you have listened and heard, and you start to piece together some of the things that you have learned from that, some of which actually raises more questions than answers, before you engage in any kind of action, I think that's critical. And that happened in the district that I'm currently in when I came on board. We've worked through the issues and brought it to a conclusion or a resolution. So without, again, I know I'm sounding somewhat vague or ambiguous, but it's just unusual. My experience has been, although I haven't been an interim a number of times, but I did not have that issue in my former district, but I did have that issue in this district. Conversely, I walked into Freetown Lakeville with no business manager, no assistant superintendent, no high school principal, no elementary principal at 2 levels, and 2 assistant principals, all of which I had to hire and put in place. So that is the opposite of what you get, but it's still part of the role and the condition that a superintendent plays in oversight of administrators. And so it was important for me that I needed to build an administrative team in the case of Freetown Lakeville, so that whoever came in as the permanent superintendent would have in place a strong team that was working to being a collaborative team. You know, conversely, in other districts, when you had some of the challenges with either staff or administrators, you have to then make sure that you address those and you address those in an appropriate manner. And that is really not reacting in a knee-jerk kind of way, but in getting all of the details and all of the information, and then what is appropriate and what is in the best interest of students in the long run should always, in my opinion, be the underpinning of your decision. I read a book. Well, I didn't read a book. I had to read it because he was my dissertation chair. And it was by Dr. Richard Ackerman. And it's called The Wounded Leader. And it is a narrative inquiry of tales where he interviews all kinds of leaders. And as he says in the end, one of the basic conclusions is you're really not a leader until you've been wounded. And there isn't a leader at whatever level who hasn't been wounded to some degree. So, and we learn from that and we move on. But again, as he says, to be a real leader, you're going to be wounded sometime in your career. Unfortunately, I have been. As most superintendents, most building principals will tell you that they have been.
Thank you. Do you have anything that you would like to add, or do you have any questions for us before you leave?
Before I leave.
Before we conclude.
No, I would just, first of all, thank the committee very much for interviewing me. I know that you have three well-qualified candidates, and I think that your choice is really about time and fit and place, and who is going to be the best person. I would encourage you to think about, when you look at my transition plan in particular, about the kind of work that I do with respect to transition planning. I'm doing that right now with the incoming superintendent in Oxford. As part of that plan, as I outlined, ensuring that nothing is left on the table unanswered so that you can make that transition as seamless as possible. But I thank the committee. I wish you well as you move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
We will be hiring on Wednesday evening, and everyone will get a call.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very
Thank you
much.
so much. Before we start the interviewing process, the members will introduce themselves. Then you can tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll start firing the questions at you.
I'm Catherine Cavallo, I'm from Dudley.
Jamie Terry from Charlton.
Pauline O'Coin from Dudley.
Mary Antossi from Charlton.
Elaine Rabbit from Charlton, nice to see you again.
And Stephanie Reed from Charlton.
Hello again.
And Mr. Petruzak is not here because of a death in the family. I think you met him before, Mr.
Yes,
Petruzak.
last week. That's too
And
bad.
we're going to go around the table asking the questions,
Sure.
and there'll be a second round, starting with,
Sure.
Try to have him talk first.
oh, I'm sorry. Yes, first, but we're
Well,
going to.
first of all, my name is Alan Himmelberger, and wanted to thank all of you for a long afternoon as you make the selection for the interim. I guess the best way I could describe it is that the position for me is fascinating because of how much I have followed Dudley-Charlton over the years, and been a bit envious of all the things that you do and do so well. And having been now a superintendent for 9 years, and looking at what to do in the future, the beach for the month of July and August just doesn't have as much excitement as potentially being an interim superintendent at Dudley-Charlton for 1 year. And I look forward to the opportunity. I think that this district has done so much with so little for so long that I look forward to bringing my connections at the state level to hopefully getting some more help and assistance to make the district continue for the next superintendent.
Thank you.
I'll start. How do you keep the school committee informed? In particular, what is your strategy around issues that are your responsibility but the school committee should be involved with?
I think it's a bit different in every committee. I chaired a school committee a few years ago, and certainly work through the chair as the superintendent. And that, for me, given the fact that sometimes it's a quick phone call or a quick email or a quick text, is the way to get the information out quickly. Certainly reporting. We do a biweekly update and give the committee the information that is happening throughout the district. I think that committees and superintendents need to work together and look at each other as resources. And I think that two-way communication is what it takes to build the trust, to build the relationship so that you can move the district forward.
Hi.
Hi.
The Dudley-Charlton Regional School District 2018 to 2021 Strategic Plan Portrait of a Graduate that just came out details an initiative which embodies an Everybody Matters motto across the district. Please explain how you plan to ensure that every child, teacher, and administrator is supported in every way needed for his or her success during the upcoming year, and examples of ways in which you've accomplished this during your professional career are welcome.
So that's a great question.
Thanks.
A great question. You have to also include families, parents, taxpayers, everybody that's in the entire community.
Okay.
But certainly at our center is students. That's why we are all here. Not to get rich and famous, but to make sure that our students are prepared for life that faces them when they leave us. I think that being accessible, being open, being accountable is what works for me. Certainly, there's nothing better than standing, and some of you, Elaine and Stephanie, have heard some of this, but standing in front of a school and greeting everybody that comes in the morning is fantastic, especially when they pronounce your name right. And so it really is the connections that you want students to have. You want them to feel that they can take charge of their learning, that they feel safe in our schools, that they have the supports to do whatever they can to realize their goals. I think, again, one thing that I've tried and seems to work well is supper with the super. And that is something that I do in the spring in every building. And it allows every stakeholder to have a free meal. And it could be school committee members, it can be parents, it can be town administrators, it could be staff, it could be students, all sitting around a table and hearing from the superintendent what's going on, what are the initiatives, what's in front of us, and then asking them for their feedback or their questions. And you have a lot of brain power in those suppers. And so I think that that's one way to really get everybody to feel they have a voice.
Thank you.
Thanks.
How important to you are community ideas and parent community input into the district decision-making? How will you facilitate the flow of information from the district parents and community? How will you facilitate the flow of ideas and critical feedback from parents and other citizens back to the district?
I think that in the short span of 12 months, trying to meet as many people is a challenge. However, everyone has to feel that they can pick up the phone and call me and come in and make an appointment. That everyone can feel that they have access and that they have someone that will listen. I think that the ability to listen and listen some more is huge, and you have to be able to open the doors. And parents have a lot invested in us, and they trust us with their children every day. So we have to be able to give them a platform with questions, with concerns. A lot of times it may go to the special ed department. It may go to the principals of the building. Sometimes it's the building administrative assistants that can answer that. But there has to be that two-way openness, and people have to feel encouraged to bring anything, a question, a comment, a criticism, a congratulations, whatever it is. They have to feel that they can do that without any ramifications except for taking it for what it is, on face value. And I think that's something that I believe folks that in the districts that I have been in would say, yeah, we feel that comfortability that we can come forward and ask tough questions, easy questions, or suggest something that might work. And certainly that, I think, is something that we have to continue, even if it's just for the 1 year.
Okay. What similarities, if any, do you believe there are between being a superintendent of a school district and a chief executive officer of a major corporation? Describe some of the steps that you would take every day to ensure the greatest effectiveness of organizational operation, and how you would define whether you had been successful by taking these steps.
There's a lot of similarities in terms of the responsibility. I mean, we are in charge of, as the superintendent, of many millions of dollars. And then we have to make sure that we show how well they are spent and to what end the goals that they match to. We also don't have a traditional bottom line that corporations and private sector does have. Ours is much sometimes tougher to manage and to measure. And yet you know it when you see it. As you, just a week ago, as you saw the graduates receiving diplomas, you know every single one of those students, if we were successful, if we were able to give them all that they need to be prepared in their 12 or 13 years in the district. And so I think that intrinsic measurement, as compared to a profit and loss statement or an annual report, is very similar to what a CEO would be doing. We have similar checks and balances. You know, school committees, parents, administrators, superintendents have some authority by Mass General laws, but it's not unequivocal and it's not unchecked. CEOs have a lot of authority to run their day-to-day operations, but it's not without a board of directors. It's not without shareholders. So there are a few similarities. However, I think the biggest difference is in how you measure your profit, how you measure if you've hit your goals for the year. And with superintendents, it's really how well we have been able to educate that whole child and been able to give students what they need in the classroom, outside of the classroom, to manage their own complicated lives in today's environment. So that really is the biggest difference, the human capital.
Thank you.
Thanks.
If you could tell us how you prepare your budget for the school committee, explain your process, and share your experiences in how you work with the budget and finance subcommittee, town administrators, town finance boards, and boards of selectmen.
So the theme that you might hear again is that open and honest approach, that accessible approach. We have to include the towns. We have to make sure that those meetings are held early and often. Certainly, sometimes around the capital planning, early in the fall, to see what is in front of the towns as to how that will impact the regional school district. I think that school committees want to know what the numbers are as early in the process as possible. And those budget subcommittees need to have that information tempered with the understanding that numbers change. And there are ways that those budget numbers can change from the beginning of the process to bringing it before the towns for a vote. But I think giving the right information openly and with the spirit that it is intended is critical, because while there are certain things that can't be, or you wouldn't want to make public early in the process, especially if it is a shrinking staff, most everything you want to have out there as here's where we are, here's what we're looking to do, hopefully with resources that are growing from year to year. And I think that has to be in the forefront, and it's never too early to start. You know, even 10, 15 years ago it was, well, we'll get to the spring, and after we get through February vacation, we'll start looking at, and now we back that up to, okay, it's Christmas, now it's almost, we have barely recorded the votes at town meeting, and we're already looking at next year. And what are the goals and objectives? What is the capital planning? What's the long-term financial environment for the district? Where are we going, and how are we going to get there? So that is a almost 11-month process now. Sure.
Our past two superintendents made sure that they were known to our students and were in the schools and at activities. I know that being an interim could possibly make that difficult, but it is important to represent this district, and I was wondering if you had a plan for how to be connected to our students.
I look at the students in the district that I serve as my students. They deserve my attendance as much as if I was on the middle of a 4-year contract, because they don't get to repeat that year. I would anticipate continuing my 75 nights out, whatever it takes, to try and get to as many activities and support students in whatever role that I can. As the one, it's going to take them a year just to learn my name, and then I'll be gone. But I think it's important to be present and to get to know as many people in this district as soon as possible. I mean, all of the staff, all of the families, all of the townspeople, all of the students. I mean, I do have a good memory. I don't know if it's going to process that many that quickly, but that's what you need to do. You have to have that connection. It's not just a figurehead for the year. You know, yes, we are asked to be the steward of the district. We are asked to be the bridge to the next superintendent, but you still have to do the job that year. You know, our students deserve that. So I would look forward to being as visible as I possibly could. I've been in districts at 7 a.m. every day for the last 15 years or so. That's not going to change. Just have to get up a little earlier, but I'll be there. And as long as it takes at the end of the day to be able to be seen and be visible and be supportive of the work that our staff and administrators do, as well as what the students do. You have to. That's why we're here. Thanks.
Round two. Control is.
First of all, how many rounds?
Just two, just two.
Oh,
It's a short
okay.
fight. Control is an important element in managing a school district. How do you manage to be in control without being overly controlling?
I think the way that I always have a saying that was burned into my brain early on, that you have the most power when you exercise it the least. And I think, in terms of controlling the district, look, this district has tremendous employees, staff, support staff, teachers, administrators. So I think that managing of personnel, of controlling the district, is really going to be a minimal part of the year. I think to make sure that you talk to people, walk out the building at the end of the day, tell me what you need to do your work. Tell me what you need to support your classroom or your building or your extracurricular activity. Those are great questions because you sometimes hear things that you wouldn't hear because year after year you can't get to it, so it stops being advocated for. So I think that, as long as people know, as long as employees, as long as educators know that there is support, that someone listens, that someone cares about their social emotional learning, anything's possible. And when folks feel good about the work that they've done, that there's a recognition for that, there's not a lot of controlling that needs to happen because people want to do the best they can. People want to inherently do the hard work. That's why we're here. No one is here to get rich and famous. We're here because we want to be. And maybe a generation ago it was fun to have the summers off. Well, most of us don't have the summers off anymore. There's professional development to do. There's constant coursework to have to be done. There's recertification. There's so much that people do year-round that I think that the term professional applies to everybody in education. That's how I tell my head custodians, you're the first line of defense. I introduce them first at back to school every year, and I introduce every single employee. Custodians get the first introduction. They also get probably the loudest standing ovation, but they are our first line of defense. They are the safety and the security of our buildings. We had our head custodian last year was Teacher of the Month. He got to park in the front row because that's what's in the students vote that. So that's pretty neat. And I think you have to treat everybody that we all have a role to play to be able to be on the same team and support the work. It's not enough to have a great teacher in front of that classroom. You have to have outstanding support up and down the staff. And I think not to be confused with not reacting when there's an issue or a potential issue, but in terms of controlling, this district has tremendous talent. I know that. I do know a few of the more talented folks too, but this district has so many good people working for it. And so I really think that control piece is really just, what do you need to do your job? How can I help you do your job better? That's a powerful question. So, thanks.
I believe a positive outlook, strong energy, and constant attentiveness make a leader successful. I expect the interim superintendent to bring each of these attributes to the table every single day to help our students and staff. What attributes do you think make a successful leader?
You have to be totally immersed in the work. I tell the administrative team, call me anytime. Text me anytime. I don't care if it's Easter Sunday morning. I don't care if it's Christmas Eve. If there's a question or a comment or something that needs a response, don't wait. It's a 24/7, and I hate to use that expression because it does get overused, but it's a total immersion into the work. You have to be. And so when people know that there's no bad time to call, there's no bad time to check in, that it's any time, and that's how I've always operated, then I think that is the best way to have that communication. I don't know if I answered the question exactly, but I think that total immersion into the work you have to have. And there are days when you never put your feet up at 4:30 and go, geez, I wonder when we're going home. There's always something that you haven't done yet that you have to get to. So, I mean, it's a job that you really have to want to put in the time.
So you have to have the energy.
Yeah, you do. You have to have something that drives you in here every morning at 7 o'clock.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
We think we have excellent candidates. How can you convince us that you are the person for the position?
Well, I happen to know the other two candidates. You do have good candidates here. All I can tell you is I know that two of the big issues in front of the interim superintendent are capital and getting MSBA or someone to understand the needs of this particular building, and also negotiations of an upcoming contract with Unit A along with the support staff, wages and salary. Those are two big areas that are going to be in front of us next year. I think with my connections at the state level, my willingness to be strong and in front of as many people as are necessary to get Jack McCarthy and Jim McDonald at MSBA to look at this as not a constituency that will be fine because the building's been so well maintained over the years. Don't tell me that. Tell me that the building is almost 50 years old next year, and twice a century you got to put some money into a building. And so that's something that I look forward to sinking my teeth into by marshaling everybody. Our senators, our representatives, our congressmen, our senators in Washington, get everybody on board and say, come on out. Here's where we're deficient. Here's what we need to have done in this building. Let's go. And I think that, we talked a little bit last week about negotiations and what kind of style do we use? Is it that medieval style of just, sitting across the table and here's my latest, proposal and get back to me next week, and then it comes back and we don't have any conversation in between? Or is it interest-based? Is it we are working for common goals? And I think Dudley-Charlton has used IBB in the past. But those are things that the goal would be to get those contracts in place by June 30th before they expire. So that's a big part of the year, to be able to do that. So I think that I bring the experience in those two key areas to bear, and would really look forward to that part of the job as being, hey, this is a challenging goal, and it's one that we have some clear deliverables on and metrics to judge it by and its success. And so that's why I think that I have that background that would help. Thanks.
Okay. There are many things to think about as a superintendent. As a superintendent, what are some of the things that keep you up at night when you think about public education and the direction that it is going?
I think that the one thing that struck me the last couple of years is how stressed and anxious our students are, and how they have become, that's become their constant mode of operation. Anxiety all the time, and stress with no downtime. And some of it is not even school related. It can be family related. It can be driven through social media. But the level of stress that our students face, I taught an AP Lit class this spring. You would think these students don't have a care in the world. They're already in to their school of choice. They've got it all lined up, and they have great supports at home. They were as stressed as anybody in the building. And so, you know, I know that some of the blame is on social media. I mean, we carry around this constant drumbeat of bad and good stuff and everything in between in our hands. And we ask a student to leave his phone in the locker at the beginning of school and pick it up at the end of it. They can't. They can't. We can't. I mean, we're at a restaurant and we get an Amber Alert, everybody stops. I mean, you could be in a 250-seat restaurant, and an Amber Alert comes out, there is pin drop while we all grab our phones and look at what's going on. So as adults, we face that constant pressure, that constant drumbeat that's driven by social media. And that's really, I think, had a huge role in our students. So that bothers me because it doesn't allow them to access everything we can give them. If they're always thinking, I was the only one not invited to that party, I can't believe this, you know, and that's a real issue for kids. And it doesn't matter what background they come from, doesn't matter what level they're achieving. It's in some ways the great equalizer, that cell phone. And so that bothers me, that every student today has so much anxiety and stress. And some of it we put on them, and some of it is carried around by them, and some of it is external forces. But I heard a great story of a group of 40-somethings, of which I am no longer in that club, but there was a weekend dinner party, and the host made everybody put their phones in a basket, and he put it in the closet, the hall closet, and locked the closet. He said the panic, the terror on people's faces was real. Are you kidding me? I'm going to have to talk to you for 3 hours? I need the phone. And so I think that stress level of our students really is something that I worry about. Obviously, the caveat to having constant access to technology is the bad stuff that we hear about over and over and over again, to the point that frequency overestimation. We think it's going to happen to us tomorrow. Only 100 children are abducted in the country by someone that they don't know or are related to. Only 100 are snatched every year. And yet, when you listen to some of the news, you think it's going to happen tomorrow in your town. And so that constant access to real-time stuff that happens all over the place is a real challenge. And certainly when you look at the safety of our schools and that percentage, those odds of something bad happening, there's only 95,000 public schools in the country. And you factor in how many shootings where at least one person is injured every year. Those aren't, we think Powerball's shorter odds than that. And so that being able to have everybody trained to respond, to have everyone to know exactly what to do if they pick up a piece of paper in the men's room, to be able to understand how we respond to bad stuff or potential bad stuff, that's a lot of work. We didn't have to deal with that a generation ago. We didn't have to deal with the whole social, emotional, behavioral stuff. I mean, every school district now has wraparound services that you would have only thought were hospital and clinical driven a generation ago. We have psychologists, we have therapists, we have so many skilled professionals that have to help our kids just to get through the day. That wasn't the way it was not too long ago. And so those are the things that really bother me, because you wonder how much you can actually influence that, how much you can actually convince a senior who's already been accepted to the University of Chicago, Wellesley College, and MIT, that you don't have to worry about everything now. You just don't. No, I have to. I have stress. No, you don't. Where's your downtime? What's that? And so these are the things that our kids really, we have to find a way to diffuse some of that and make it okay not to always be driven by that technology that's going to create some of that stress. So, thanks.
Special education is a particular challenge because of the complexity of rules, laws, service needs, and student and parent concerns. When you assess the effectiveness of your special education programs, what are some of the criteria that you use? How have you worked with the CPAC in your past districts? And then tell us about a problem or challenge you have addressed involving special education and how you worked this out.
Well, a small world being what it is, I just found out who the president of your CPAC is. And I've worked with her over the last several years. I think that obviously the state gives you a whole litany of rules and regs to follow. The coordinated program review that you have to go through every fifth or sixth year becomes a whole year's worth of homework. And we have just finished ours and had very, very strong reviews. One of the holes we only had 2 special ed criteria that we were deficient in at BMR. One of them was we didn't have a well-established CPAC. And so that's something that we have to do. I think in special ed, you have to have strong, and by strong I mean unwavering professionals who know what they're doing. Because the chance for not delivering the right information in a firm tone at the right time is damaging. And it gives parents a false or misguided hope of what's happening. It potentially binds the district legally and financially. So you need to have, first and foremost, I could not be a special ed director. You have to have someone in every layer of special education that knows not only all of the rules and regulations and all of the laws, but has the ability to frame everything in a compassionate and caring way, but at the end of the day, a firm and fair way. And I think that's the challenge that is special education. You can look at how many out-of-district students were brought back. You can look at a whole way of measuring spending on special education, but we know it's only increasing. That was one of the things the Foundation Budget Review got right. I haven't really addressed it a whole lot yet, but they have identified the costs of health insurance and special education as the 2 most volatile parts of a school budget. So how do you manage to them, knowing that you don't control who moves into your district? So that is a flexibility and elasticity that you have to have, because part of our charm is that we educate everybody who walks through our doors. We don't tell somebody, sorry, you can go to the charter school down the street. No, we're public. We take everybody. And as long as you're living in our towns or choicing in fairly, we educate every single person. And we will try and meet all of your needs, even those that are very, very specifically scripted by the law, to make sure that we give everything we can to some of our students that are the toughest to get to achieve. And that's a real challenge, because that population, again, is not decreasing. And whether it's a building-based team that doesn't find a student needs an IEP, well, guess what? They might need something else. Whether it's a 504, whether it's an accommodation plan. Sometimes it's an easy fix, and sometimes it's a complex fix, but you gotta fix it.
Okay, last question. How have you supervised an administrator or teacher who was having trouble managing a school or a classroom, and what have you done about it? And then I know that being an interim could make this a difficult task, but how would you approach this type of issue?
I think it's only difficult if it maybe has been long-running, and I guarantee there's not many of those, if any, in this district. So it might be someone who just has hit, a classroom teacher who has just hit the wall and has had challenges far beyond what he or she thought they were going to have as a classroom teacher. And I have a daughter who's hitting that wall right now. It's for another day. But you have to let them know that that this is not a unique reaction. And if it is something more pervasive or deeper, then that's a separate conversation. But certainly, for people who are struggling, I think that support is readily available. And I would use every tool in the toolkit to find out what causes the problem and find ways to solve it and to mitigate it. And sometimes the problem is deep, and it's only presenting itself now. Sometimes it's just something that comes on. I think with administrators, all of these jobs in education have only gotten more complex. You're under the glare of social media all the time. And so how do I operate with my values knowing that the world is second-guessing me? That can be a daunting task. And yet, when you're in there doing the hard work every day, we really don't care about social media. They can say whatever they want about me. I know that at the end of the day, every decision was based upon what's right for students, and as long as we do that, everything else takes care of itself. If we're doing what's right for our students, we're doing what's right for our parents. If we're doing what's right for kids, we're doing what's right for our towns. And so I think that being able to let folks know it's okay that you're going to have a roadblock, let's address it. I always say that the tough questions, the hard questions to have, the difficult conversations only get worse if you ignore them. You have to take and get right to the root of what's bothering someone or why a staff member is no longer able to deliver at the high level that they have been. Those are real. I mean, we had the conversation at one of our PD days about social emotional. Who takes care of our social emotional health? When you think about it, we're so focused in on our students, but what about us? And so I think that's where staff needs to understand that it's okay to have fun. We don't use that word very much, fun, talking about staff. It's okay to make a mistake. It's okay to try something and have it fail. It's okay to do that. But at the end of the day, as long as you want to do the work that you're doing, we'll find a way to get the solution for you. And everyone has to feel that. Whether you're in a union, whether you're not in the union, whether you're a parent, whether you're a town board member, I mean, you have to be able to have that total communication. Thanks.
Before we conclude the interview, is there anything you want to add or ask us any questions?
I think the only thing I want to add is to let you know that you have 3 top quality candidates. And I can only speak for me, that for the next 12 months, this is where I want to be. And this is the work that I want to do. And knowing some of the folks who will be doing the work alongside of me is a bonus. And that's what makes it fascinating. But a chance to like peek behind the curtain and look at the inner workings of this district that I have followed for 15 years, that's cool. That's really neat. How do we deliver everything with a per pupil expenditure that is like below the bottom of the state? How do we do that? How do we get someone to recognize that we have needs that the state should be helping us solve? You know, all of that to me is fascinating. So all I will tell you is, this is where I want to be.
I just have one question. In your booklet, you said that you were not accepting your retirement from the Mass Retirement. Are you retiring, or are you resigning from Blackstone?
So what I did in October is I said I'm retiring.
You are retiring.
I think of the George Carlin approach. Are you retiring? Are you resigning?
That's what I'm
And
asking.
I felt that for the search for my successor, it would be far easier to say I'm retiring. And I thought about it, and I said, I'm too young to do that. And so I am looking at what I can do still to improve students' lives. And there's no better opportunity out there right now than here to do that.
So would that mean that you might be interested in the full position next spring?
Well,
Did you ask?
I don't know what the committee has
No, I'm
in
just asking.
mind, but you'd have to first see how well I do, and certainly have those discussions. But I think, you have a lot on your plate, and the district is at a critical juncture, because whoever sits here is inheriting a phenomenal district. In every way you measure, Dudley-Charlton is a phenomenal district. It's a fantastic place to work. It has been guided so well for the last many years. It has caring families. Both towns passed an override. Come on, who does that? So there's a lot of great things happening here. Usually when there's an interim posted, it says, you either you will be considered in the future or you will not. But certainly, I still love the work, and I look forward to the challenges to be able to help be the steward to bridge to whomever the next superintendent is. I think there's so much in store that needs to be done for whomever that is. So I don't have any plans to sign up for MTRS. I don't need health insurance, so that makes me a viable candidate. And I look forward to the challenges. I think it's a wonderful opportunity.
And we will be hiring on Wednesday at our regular school committee meeting.
Okay, great.
So thank you.
Terrific. Thank you all for your time. This has
Thank
been
you. Nice
wonderful to
meeting
be
you.
here. Thank
Nice
you
to
so
meet you.
much.
Thank you.
And before we start firing questions at you, you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Oh, good, again.
Okay.
Let's see, for those that were here the other night, if I, if I trip over myself and can remember who I am and where I came from. But first of all, I want to say thank you to the Dudley-Charlton District for inviting me the first time and then inviting me back. You probably don't need to hear this, but the folks that interviewed the other night, I want to give them a pat on the back. I thought they did a great job. Having been in this business for as long as I have, candidates try to assess very quickly what the people are like in the district beyond that, but as the district is assessing the candidate. But to a person, they were very, very polite. They were very cordial, to the point in their questions, and allowed me ample time to respond as best I could. And I just want to give a shout out to them. They represented the district well, so I think they served you well. Thank you very much to that. But anyways, Ted Malvey, I've been in the business for over 40 years. As I say, I know I don't look that because I'm still a very, very young man. But I moved out to this neck of the woods, if you will, almost 40 years ago from the Boston area, so I always give an apology if I still have some of the Boston accent. It's because that's where I was born. So I tend not to close my R's and use some of the slang that I probably shouldn't, given my profession. But in any event, moved out here many, many years ago to become initially a principal, and then within a year, I believe it was, became a superintendent principal. And in those days, West Brookfield was part of Quabog, and Warren was, and New Braintree. Long and short of that was they separated, and I became a superintendent principal. And that's really where I cut my teeth on the superintendent role. In those days, you didn't have staff. You were it. You had to do the budget. You had to do the transportation. You had to assist in food service. And all those great tasks gave me the opportunity to really get a firsthand view of what a school superintendent was all about. And then I moved on in my career. Was assistant superintendents for personnel, curriculum, and then moved on to the superintendent ranks, did some time in Connecticut, and came back to Massachusetts because I was vested here in Massachusetts. And then eventually, lo and behold, when this early retirement piece came in Massachusetts, the numbers worked for me in terms of my age and the number of years that I had worked in education. And with full knowledge of my wife, I didn't do this on my own at midnight, but full knowledge of my wife, I took early retirement with the intent of going back to work on my time, on my terms. And I could do that either part-time or I could do it full-time, and lo and behold, I did that for 10 years. I've done 7 interim superintendencies, 4 in Massachusetts, I believe, and 3 in Connecticut. And I would go into a district, much like this, where you folks are in the throes of looking for a new superintendent. And quite honestly, there were a variety of reasons that I may have gone into the district. Some was through natural attrition, some a number of them were because of major issues in the district with the outgoing superintendent or finances, et cetera, et cetera. Be that as it may, it opened up a new career for me, so I ended up doing 7 of those. If I'm fortunate enough to come to Dudley-Charlton, that will be number 8, and I probably think there's a number 9 and a number 10 still there, because I'm not done yet. My family has grown. The children, we have 5 sons. They're all grown and married. We have 11 grandchildren. They take up a lot of our time, and we absolutely love it. And fortunately, they're all back here in Massachusetts, so we do get to see them. But within that, I still have a lot of fire in my belly, so to speak. Even though I'm retired and I've taken a few years off, that was because of some family issues that needed to be addressed, and time was better off spent at home. I'm ready to get back into it. And again, if it's not here, or if it is here, there'll probably be a 9 and a 10, maybe one more. We'll see. We'll see how it goes down the road. But I believe I still have a lot to offer districts. I have a tremendous amount of energy. I understand completely what the role of an interim superintendent is, and I'm willing to commit to that. The beauty of this is it's in my backyard. I live in Sturbridge. It's a few-minute drive here, particularly on the winter months, having been in this business so long. Sometimes that can be difficult during the winter months if you're commuting somewhere. But it also is kind of right up my alley, so to speak, because this will be the 4th regional school district that I've served. Several of the districts have been 2-town regions, and at least one was a 3-town region. At one point in my career, and regional boards can get large, particularly if it's a region union type of arrangement, but in one of my positions, because of the governance structure of the regional board and then the local school committees and then the combined boards, at one point I reported to 55 people in a governance structure. I've always said facetiously, with no disrespect to them, but you probably could bring peace to the Mideast sooner than trying to get 55 people to agree. So I'm here, fully aware of, what, although I don't know all the ins and outs of the regional district here, but I have some familiarity with it, and I come with full knowledge, full energy, and I'm ready to hit the deck running.
And Catherine will be the first.
Hi, I'm Kathy Cabell. I'm from Dudley. My first question is, how do you keep the school committee informed? In particular, what is your strategy around issues that are your responsibility but the school committee would have an interest in?
Sure. Well, I think if you've had the opportunity to read on my entry plan there, that would start right from the get-go, so to speak. I reach out to the committee. I need to hear from you. You need to hear from me. But we really have to develop a working relationship for a lot of reasons. But primarily, coming in as an interim school superintendent, I want you folks to know that I mean business, that I'm here to represent you, to represent the staff, to represent the students, to represent the communities in what we collectively pull together for what we can do for the best education for our children. But to the point, I make it a point all the time to deal directly with the chairperson of the committee so that they would hear firsthand and then reach out to the committee members as needed. But I don't want to interfere in that communication process, and I want to be accurate in the information that I provide not only to the chair but to the other members. So there will be many, many opportunities that I will communicate directly, either phone or ask people to come in and have a cup of coffee or a glass of water, and let's sit down and we'll go over the issues of the day or some of the rumors that might be out there that we need to dispel very, very quickly. But in terms of an organizational structure and lines of communication and authority, I'm a stickler on that. I will make sure that I initially deal directly with the chair, but not to leave other individuals out as well.
Hi, I'm Jamie Terry. The Dudley-Charlton Regional School District 2018 to 2021 Strategic Plan, Portrait of a Graduate, which was just released, details an initiative which embodies an Everybody Matters motto across the district. Please explain how you plan to ensure that every child, teacher, and administrator is supported in every way needed for his or her success during the upcoming year. Examples of ways in which you have accomplished this during your professional career are welcome.
Well, I never did anything on my own such that I want to portray myself that I'm the knight in shining armor coming in and doing X, Y, Z. To the contrary, I've worked very, very closely with people in the district. Things don't always have to happen from the top down. Many of the successes happen from the bottom up, with all due respect, from the building level, et cetera, and from the parents and community. So throughout my career, I've made that as a practice. Some of the specifics I'm slipping on right now, but in terms of how we reach out for all our students, we have specific legitimate programs governed by the law that we all are aware of, that we have to take care of youngsters that may have disabilities. But beyond that, I think the youngsters that slip through the cracks, the marginal student, the middle range student, to a greater or lesser extent in the districts I've been in, we've also emphasized that, so that the youngsters on maybe the lower end of the curve get attended to, and then the youngsters on the upper end of the curve, those youngsters that are in college and AP classes once they hit the high school level, that we know we have those extremes, but I've always tried to get people to focus in on the middle range, so to speak, as well. And that may include youngsters that have diverse needs, whether they're learning needs, physical needs, or emotional needs. Certainly, in some of the communities I've been in, we've had large ethnic populations, and they need to be tended to, as well as the middle range student, et cetera. We've had language barriers in terms of second languages that families had. I think I mentioned the other night in one of the districts I was in, Weymouth, I believe we had, at the time, upwards of 60 different languages that we tended to. So there's another component of diversity of how we have to reach out for those youngsters. Along with that, despite having 5 sons that in the day competed up here, but we won't talk about that, in the days they competed up here at Shepherd Hill. But they made many good friends. But my point is that despite myself and my wife having 5 sons, and athletics was a big component of their lives and our life to support them, I'm also big on the arts. I'm not a talented person. I play a little guitar. I sing a little on my own. You wouldn't hire me for the wedding, but we're able to get that done. But I think that's an extremely, extremely important part. And I've been fortunate to say in almost all the districts, not just because Ted Malby supported it, but if you come to the superintendent, miffs the thing, it's not going to go too far. So I've always tried to encourage that. So the arts, both the performing and various aspects of it are very, very important for me. So in a nutshell, a broad-based answer, but I think all those components are really what I got into the business when I had my early training. We were told that education really was for the well-rounded person. But throughout the years, because of many, many legal issues and political issues, and depending on who was the power base out there, we've kind of focused in on some things and I think have lost sight of that whole education. So I'm still a support of that. You can, I guess, teach an old dog new tricks, but some of those old tricks are still pretty good.
Pauline O'Coin, how important to you are community ideas and parent community input into district decision-making? How will you facilitate the flow of information from the district parents and community? How will you facilitate the flow of ideas and critical feedback from parents and other citizens back to the district?
Back to the district, yeah.
Right.
Well, again, I think you'll see in my report that I mentioned that my style is one of availability and being out there so people can have access to me and see me. I do listen, pretty good listener. And information that people have, they're not always going to be 110% behind us. But I think they have their right to express themselves so that I can understand that, of where the pulse is, so to speak, out there in the district, but also as I try to work with my fellow administrators and the school committee and the local leaders, that we can come to some type of consensus of what's important, number one, but in the end of the day, what will be supported by the community out there. Now, I apologize the other night. Someone asked a question, and I didn't get in too much of it, but it was to that point, Pauline, about communication. And I think the reference was to innovative ways. And at the time, I just kind of said, well, gee, I'm not really the innovative guy per se on communication piece. I'm basic. I do answer phone calls. I do answer emails. I'm available. I'll sit down with people. I'll be out to school activities and to the extent possible out-of-school activities where people can see and speak and approach me. I'm very, very approachable. But then afterwards, when I thought of it, I said, certainly this day and age with the social media piece, maybe that's where that question was heading. And yes, that's important, very important, given where parents and community members are this day and age. But I didn't want to lead with that's the be-all and end-all, because there's also a downside to that. And I, as a superintendent, have been advised over the recent years, be very, very, very careful. The yellow caution flag goes up because of misuse, abuse, and legal issues that districts get themselves involved in, and how accounts can be compromised. So I want to just kind of clear that up a little bit. Yes, those are important, but we have to be very, very careful how we use it. And back to the main point, I probably have been most pleased and successful in districts that use their school websites to a fairly well. And I, out of respect for all the communities I've served, and I won't say which one, but one of the communities was very adept at it by providing not just the general notices that come out, but also a separate link that parents or community members, if they didn't know who to address the issue or the question to, they could send in, and that would show up. And then that could be filtered out. Either the superintendent would respond to that, or if we needed some expertise in another part of the operation, they would respond to that. But then everyone else could see that. So that, yeah, I mean, it's beyond the blog piece, where a lot of times I think people use a blog for maybe not so righteous an issue. But this was really, gee, I heard yada, 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 or what is this about? So we could put that out there, and then maybe someone else would respond that, I said, gee, I had no idea about that, and I've had 3 children in the school district. So I think that is critical. And then with that, that rolled into business and community partnerships, because in this particular community, we had a wealth of resources out there, and people bought into it. That allowed them to have a voice. And then certainly you have the public forums, you have the evening sessions, whether it's a parent group or a focus group that's formed in the town. And downright to, that I used in many of my districts, a group of people as an offshoot from the parent group, that we would have a meeting usually once a month or once every other month, issues that they needed to put on the table, or maybe issues that I needed to put on the table to get information out. And we would sit down and spend some time going over that. Yeah.
Hi, Mary Antossi. What similarities, if any, do you believe there are between being a superintendent of a school district and a chief executive officer of a major corporation? Describe some of the steps that you would take every day to ensure the greatest effectiveness of organizational operation, and how would you define whether you had been successful by taking these steps?
Oh, good, good. Well, certainly in modern-day superintendencies, the shift has been from just the superintendent, the head of the district, to really a CEO kind of frame of mind. So as much as I view it that way, I also don't lose sight of the fact that the difference is you don't get to hide. You don't get to insulate yourself as a public school superintendent. And if you're not willing to come into a district and roll up your sleeves and get in the trenches and work through the issues, you're not going to be successful as a superintendent, but the district is not going to be successful. Because this day and age, people want a piece of that. They want a piece of the action. CEOs, with no disrespect, can insulate themselves. They can isolate themselves. They don't have to return their phone calls. They're not on the public roll, so to speak. They'll live and die whatever their profit margin is, or how they can find new markets, et cetera. With all due respect, I understand how that works. But a public school superintendent, and in particular for someone like me as an interim, I don't come into a district looking to make a new name for myself. I made my name in my formal career. I did whatever it was, almost 40 years in the business full time. I moved on my own accord when I needed to, and for either a better opportunity or to position myself in the case of if I was in Connecticut to come back to Massachusetts. So I'm not looking to show people what's in my bag of tricks. It's more important for me coming in as an interim superintendent that folks say when I leave, gee, Ted did the job. He kept us on track. Yeah, we might not have always agreed with him, but he kept us focused, and by goodness, he did the job. So I think that's critical. And I think that's a difference between, I suppose CEOs have to do that to their shareholders and their boards and whatnot, but it's not the day-to-day, the see them, touch them, get involved with the folks. And the last thing, and I say this with all good-heartedness, you don't get the perks as a superintendent that you do as a CEO. They don't send you off to the Caribbean. They don't give you a bonus at the end of the year and whatnot. So if you can't live in that environment, then don't go. And for me, if you don't understand that, then don't put your name out in these interim superintendencies. But the flip side of that is I think I've been successful. I think I still have a lot to offer and certainly have a wealth of experience that I can try to help you folks as you go through, keeping the district intact and eventually landing your new superintendent. Okay.
So Elaine Rabbit, it's nice to see you again, Dr.
Yeah,
Malby.
thanks.
Tell us how you prepare your budget for the school committee. Explain your process and share your experiences in how you work with the Budget and Finance Subcommittee. town administrators, town finance boards, and boards of selectmen.
Yeah. This is probably the best example of from the bottom up. When I first got into school administration many, many years ago, the model of the superintendent was, and when I had received my doctorate degree too, I was trained that you need to know the answer. You need to know, you need to be able to control things. You need to be able to present. You need to be on stage. That changed. That changed very, very quickly because I realized, back on the question about the support, through a debt exclusion override, that we, primarily me through my leadership, didn't reach out to the people. We thought we could do it on our own, and we failed miserably. When we regrouped and we reached out to the people and started to listen to them, started to present, we were successful the second time around. So I used that at an early stage in my career, that's really the way to go. Hence, my style as a superintendent changed, that you really got to reach out to people in order to make the district work. So I've used that as a practice in order to get things done. And if superintendents this day and age don't understand that, then they're going to be in the quicksand very, very quickly. Okay, is that enough? Is there another part that you want me to mention on a little more?
No, I think that's good.
That okay?
Yeah, yeah, thank you.
Hi, Stephanie Reed again. Our past two superintendents made sure that they were known to our students and were in the schools and at activities. I know that being an interim could possibly make that difficult, but it is important to represent this district, and I was wondering if you had a plan for how to be connected to our students.
Yeah, and I think I'll piggyback on that because I think I may have left out the piece for Elaine there that with the community that people are going to know that this gentleman that comes into the district is here for the right reasons. I will be involved, again, schedules are schedules and work commitments are work commitments, but to the extent that I can, particularly on the municipal side, so that in the budget, so we work that up from the building levels and the administration and the staff and central office and your finance director, et cetera, but I've got nothing to hide. Again, I'm not trying to make a name for myself, but it's not a, oh, well, here it is, take it or leave it. We're going to go through it to a fairly well, and I don't know what your process is, but I'm comfortable with the public presentations. And it's not going to be a one-man show. It's going to be people involved in it, and the leaders at the building level or program level really need to speak to their issues. They're the experts in that. So if that helps somewhat, that's the strategy I use rather than the superintendent, clicking on a PowerPoint of saying, and then next we get people involved in it, okay? I'm sorry, Stephanie, I felt that was the undone piece there. So back on with the students in the schools, I really enjoy being out in the schools. I'm not going to be the principal. I'm not going to be looking over people's shoulders to run the operation. But I want them to know, staff, students, and administration, that the guy at the top takes the time to come out and to support us. I love the activities, whether they're, the drama, the musicals, or the awards, ceremonies, the recognition, or the little classroom project that's going on, and they're having a day of, recognition for the children, and maybe the parents and grandparents come in. I love that stuff. I love that stuff. And it's not so that I can take the show, because I blend. But I hope people will understand, because I'll tell them who I am. Again, not to put a feather in my cap, but I want them to know that this stuff is important, and that to the extent that the superintendent can get away from the busyness of his role, that I will be out there, A, so I'm knowledgeable, B, so that I'm supportive, and C, that I can articulate what the issues are, or where individual parts of the organization need some help and support.
Back to me, round two. Control is an important element in managing a school district. How do you manage to be in control without being overly controlling?
Yeah, I used the example the other night, Catherine, and I've used it for my career. Again, in my training, it was kind of a classical way of administration, but then also you get into the more modern day stuff of what life is really like in the fast lane. So my point is that there are basically four styles of leadership: autocratic, democratic, permissive, and laissez-faire. And it's a hat-changing game. So depending on what the situation is, I was trained, and I use it to this day, you need to know your audience, you need to know the maturity level of your audience, and you need to know the information level of your audience. Nothing can be worse than an educator talking jargon to people that it goes right over their head. So break it down a little bit. As Mike Wonkum says, let me break it down for you. So you break it down a little bit. So I tried to do that so that people can understand. But in order to be in control but not be a dictator, I have to shift depending on that situation. Autocratic, at times you gotta, I'm sorry, this is the way it has to be because of yada, yada, yada. Not because Ted wants it that way, but there are sound reasons for it. So there are times you may have to put your foot down a little more. Democratic times, a little bit give and take. Maybe let people kind of pull that together, or give them the wherewithal that they can come back, and then we can hash it out. When I work with my leadership team, we do that at our meetings, and then ultimately coming forward to the board if it's something that we need to present to the school committee for a decision. So autocratic, democrat, permissive, sometimes it's just, okay, but I don't know if that's really going to fly, or whether that's something we should be looking at now, but, I'll give you the time, or I'll give you X, Y, Z, or, gee, how about it, but we may have to not put that on the front burner, but by all means, it's an idea that if you want to flush it out and spend some time on it, okay, and then we can bring it back at a more appropriate time. And then laissez-faire is just kind of like, that really doesn't help, and it's kind of like the pocket veto. You don't see that working in 1,000 years, so why are we going to spend too much of our energy on it? And I have to be very, very careful with that, because as an interim, again, I'm not looking to make a name for myself, but as an interim, I want to keep the district together. I want to maintain continuity, stability. I want to keep the good things going that the consensus is that we should keep going. If there's something that needs immediate attention, then by all means we'll do that. But I'm here as someone that kind of sees that landscape, and I'm able to shift depending on the situation. Now, the proof of that is, I think, particularly in my interim superintendencies, I've gone into districts that, well, very few of them, that were well-running. More the case where there were major issues. And once we sort through that, sometimes I had to have been a little more autocratic, that, oh, goodness, we got to straighten this out pretty darn quick. Other times, all right, let's breathe something in it, but my window is short. So if it's something that we really need to address, at least I want to spend some time analyzing, understanding it, and coming back with some recommendations that if I were the full-time superintendent, I could get my shoulder into it on a longer period of time. But certainly it bears attention and the respect of the incoming superintendent coming in. Okay.
I believe that a positive outlook, strong energy, and constant attentiveness make a leader successful. I expect the interim superintendent to bring each of these attributes to the table every single day for our students and staff. What attributes do you think make a successful leader?
Well, in the case of me, it wasn't necessarily what I was taught, because what I was taught in that so-called classical administrative education was really the nuts and bolts of being a superintendent. How do you develop a budget? How do you understand accounts? How do you understand collective bargaining? How do you understand, in this case, Massachusetts state law? How do you understand federal law? How do you understand personnel? And you can go down the list of things, the tasks that you have to do. But I quickly realized, again, back probably in those days where we weren't successful on our override, I realized that you really have to be more of a people person. So take off the hat of the way you were trained, that the superintendent needed to know the answers, always be on the spotlight, et cetera, and be able to reach out and work more cooperatively with your constituent groups. So I've practiced that. It isn't something that, I pulled out and said, okay, although I certainly have done a lot of professional development in the area of leadership, but I think it's something that I was able to shift gears and say, if I'm going to have a career in this industry and I'm going to be successful for the districts that have put their faith in me, then it's really a give and take. Yes, there will be times I have to say, and I certainly would do that for a school committee. If I think you're heading down the wrong path that is so egregious, I'm going to say, we need to have a chat. And I'll try to get you back on track without embarrassing anyone, certainly in the public sector. But I think because of my ability to work with various groups, that's been my success. Thereby modeling it, I think people would say to you, if they worked with Ted Malvey, they'll say the guy listens, he's visible, he's aware of the issues, or he's willing to get the accurate information, and he doesn't make snap decisions. And if it's not a collective decision from the group, he'll be professional about it, of why and maybe where we should go or try it a different way. Okay?
We think we have excellent candidates. How can you convince us that you're the person for this position?
Because I'm only going to let you make one mistake. And if you make that mistake, no, as I've said, I understand the process. I know what you're going through. I wish you the best. If I'm the candidate to come forward, I don't think there's any on-the-job training for me. And I'm not trying to present myself as a smarty pants. I'm just simply saying you can't beat experience. I've been in the business 40-something years. I started out as a classroom teacher, moved to building administration, moved to central office administration. I was a federal intern in the days of going to my doctorate degree. I was a liaison to the White House through the Department of Education, so I got to see some of that bureaucracy, if you will. And I've learned by making mistakes, and I will continue to learn by making mistakes. Despite the wealth of information and knowledge and experience I have, there will be new issues that I'll say, my goodness, where did that come from? Despite all the fun things that I've been able to get involved in. So to that point, I think you don't have to worry about Ted Malvey understanding the job or what is the role, how is he going to fit in. I've had the regional school experience. I've had big district experience. I've had little district experience. I can recall years ago interviewing, and if I was going from a large district to a small district, committees would say, well, how are you going to adjust to us? We're itty-bitty, we're not with the multiple layers of it. Well, it worked, and I was able to adjust. Similarly, going from a small district into a large district, in the case of Weymouth, where we had, I think, upwards of 7,000 or 8,000 students at the time, budget in excess of $60 million, having to work and communicate with a mayor and a town council, an entirely different level of governance. I was able to adjust for that. So if that's important to you, that it's not a rookie coming in, or someone that had difficulties in a district and, the door's that way there, that has not happened in my career. And I think last but not least, well, two things. I'm down the street, and I've just got enough energy to keep things going. You're not going to know, as I said to the other group, you're not going to know whether Ted's an interim superintendent or full-time superintendent, because he's there giving as much energy and attention as the place deserves, because you deserve it.
There are many things to think about as a superintendent. As a superintendent, what are some of the things that keep you up at night when you think about public education and the direction that it is going?
The most critical thing, and it's happened a lot in my interims, but it's kind of been exacerbated over the last couple of years is, without question, budget, finances, and resources. I don't know where you folks are in terms of enrollment, whether you're stable, whether you're decreasing, increasing, et cetera, but without question, the pulse on that issue is palpable in school districts this day and age. All right? I saw it coming years ago because I was part of the early days when Proposition 2.5 came in, and there were massive reductions across the board, and then eventually things improved, the economy improved, and then we went in the tank again with a recession, et cetera, et cetera. But despite that, we can't lick our wounds. We have to go in there and, give it the best try we can, day in and day out. But when I say the pulse is palpable, I've been in some districts where it's been very vocal, where the naysayers, the people that really don't want to support education because of the cost, and they believe that that's a family responsibility, that why, if I don't have children in there or grandchildren, et cetera, why don't parents just, pony up what is needed? And said, well, that isn't the way our democracy works. That's not the way the Constitution is, and it's not the way that the state constitution, state government, with respect to it's a state responsibility to educate. But when I say it's palpable is that people have taken off the gloves, and they say the most difficult things on blogs or in the public sector. I've been in some communities where it's been war because of upcoming budgets, and they plaster the town with signs. And in some respects, they try to hang it on the professional educators that have the right to collective bargain for their wages and benefits, but all of a sudden they become the attack point, if you will. And that's tough. That's tough to beat, because when you come in, you've got whatever, 17, 15, wherever your class size may be, 20, 25, 30, youngsters in there that they're ready to go. Their future's on the line, and they need the best effort from that professional in front of them and from the decision makers that maybe are trying to pull things together at a different level for them. So I see that as the most difficult thing. It bothers me no end because I grew up and went to a public high school. And I can't recall ever having to ask for anything, and I was involved between student government and sports and community activities, et cetera. But I can't remember my parents struggling over the issue of, is Ted and his brothers and sisters going to get an education? Similarly, when I came out to this neck of the woods from Boston and raised 5 children with my lovely wife, I don't recall, they went to Tantascwa. I don't recall struggling, not the budgets were easy, but I don't recall all this struggle and angst of this side and that side going against it. And my kids got a good education. I'm proud to say I have a doctor, I have 2 lawyers, I have a financial officer in a major company and a digital marketer in a national company. Go away. That's a public education. We didn't have to struggle to get them a sound, well-rounded education. So they made it. So that's very, very difficult. So let me get back to the switching point for me was, it doesn't always happen because you may not have the resources. Because when I retired out of Cohasset, if you don't know Cohasset, look it up. It's one of the more affluent communities in the state. And I fell into the position when I came out of Connecticut. Loved it. Had wonderful people, community, administrative staff, students that we worked for. But we went in for a major school construction project. Actually, when I went in, we were finishing up on 2 elementary schools, 1 elementary, and then we went into the second elementary, and then we went in with a major effort to add on and remodel and renovate a combination middle high school. My point that I'm getting at is there were people in the community that could have wrote out the check, but there was no slam dunk when you went for that purpose and/or the budget. They needed to know, they wanted to see it, they would question your figures, they would question your knowledge of the law, they would question your time period once you get into the MSBA process, et cetera, et cetera. So I learned that it doesn't matter what the economic index is. The issues are real, they're there, do your homework, and be prepared to take some time to market whatever your issue is to try to get people on board. But without question, that's probably the biggest thing.
Thank you.
Special education is a particular challenge because of the complexity of rules, laws, service needs, and student and parent concerns. When you assess the effectiveness of your special education programs, what are some of the criteria you use? Have you worked with the CPACs in your past, how have you worked with the CPACs in your past districts? And tell us about a problem or challenge you have addressed involving special education and how you've worked this out.
I'll kind of condense it to, yes, I've had a tremendous amount of experience dealing with it. Going back some time when the Quabog district broke away and New Braintree went its way, but Warren and West Brookfield stayed on. There were four superintendents involved at the time, but the regional law said the regional superintendent would stay in place. But the committee asked me to stay on as an assistant superintendent. So what happened with that was there were multiple special education directors at the time, and they reported to me. And despite what the law says, everyone had their procedures and techniques down the way they liked them in a particular district, and we had to blend that. And I was the one ultimately responsible, working with some wonderful people that were able to pull that together. So that was a tremendous learning experience for me. But then certainly as my career moved on, I was intimately involved because of, in some districts, special education became an issue. A, because of the percentage of students involved in it, and was it an open door policy for some people in the community. B, because of the costs involved in it. C, because the state said you must pay, and if not, they can literally take it right off the Chapter 70 reimbursements. And A, B, C, D, the legal requirements and the litigation that came into being. So I was involved in that. I learned from that. And I think there's good and not so good to that. You become much more aware of the intensity of the issues, but also if a district isn't doing what it should do to the extent that it should, then it would be my responsibility to kind of, gather folks together and get going. So to that point, I became very, very involved in understanding what the annual reports look like. And we had the reviews by DESE, Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. And then from that, the follow-up CAP reports, the corrective action plans. I've also been involved with hearings at the state on that level of despite we may not have the finances, that's not an answer of not providing a child with a free and appropriate education. And I've also been involved with the federal government in civil rights reviews and violations that they thought when the complaint came forward of the district. But in all those matters, and there's probably half a dozen or so, we were able to get them resolved as we should. Step up to the plate and meet your responsibilities. Now, back on the CPAC, yes, I have been involved. I'm attentive of it. I'm not the one that meets directly with the parent groups, but I am available, and I have met with them, tried to keep the lines of communication open with them, and be responsive and certainly understand where they're coming from and where the district may be at and what we need to do to keep our improvement front and foremost.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay. How have you supervised an administrator or teacher who was having trouble managing a school or a classroom, and what have you done about it? I know that being an interim could make this a difficult task, but how would you approach this type of issue?
Well, I probably won't make friends by responding, but again, when I say that, you know, Ted is there to do the job, he's going to be full-time superintendent, that includes that. So just on the normal course of things that building administrators or program administrators might be doing, I'm not going to do the job for them, but I do get involved so I understand their job, their role better, how I might be able to assist and support them, and if that includes some corrective action via, you know, professional development or maybe some goal setting, and we all know the new process is pretty involved in that, in the evaluation component, that I'm willing to do that. I made my mistakes. I'm going to continue to make mistakes. If someone wasn't there to try to see me through it, then I wouldn't be where I'm at today. Yet on the other hand, I'll be upfront that if people are just not getting the message and they're not improving and they're making some serious violations, even as an interim, I have removed people. Not proud of that, but if things aren't working and there's no other course of action, alternative course of action, that's the purpose of the way the law is written. And now I say that, but I don't want people to be upset and thinking, well, gee, here's the, you know, the headhunter coming in, and that isn't the way I operate. I mean, you really have to be at the end of your rope before that kicks in. And when I've made those moves, I haven't been the most popular guy in town, but in the end, it was the right decision. But if the person has the wherewithal that they still can be an effective administrator, may not be clicking for them in our district, I also will help them move on, you know, kind of be a mentor and point out ABC, what they need to do, or how they need to bolster up their kind of bag of offerings to a district. But I think the bottom line on it is that I don't let people flounder. We're all in together, and hopefully, again, I don't know everything, I don't have all the answers, but hopefully we can assist people, because it's not about us at the end of the day, it's about what are we doing in the building and how are we helping our professional staff and our children, because the kids only get one shot.
Thank you.
Before we conclude the interview, do you have anything to add, or do you want to ask us any questions?
Well, I would just add that, again, I tried to present the experience piece, but also I'm not an opportunist. You might be wondering, well, why is, you know, an interim superintendent, but a lot of retired folks, you know, put their hat back in the ring, all right? I'm very happy retired. Fortunately, I had a little rough go with some help, but I'm okay. My wife is retired now. The children are all grown up, 11 grandchildren. We're at a point that we're able to do things together that I wasn't able to do during my professional career. You can't beat that. And we still love each other, by the way, so we still talk to each other. So we're able to do that. All right, and we're able to assist as needed with the grandchildren. We're you know, within an hour and a half drive to get to point A, B, C, yada, 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 yada. So why would I get out of that? Why would I get out of that? I don't jump into every one that comes down the pike opening for an interim superintendent. Typically, I'll get a call from my colleagues and the professional associations, whether it's MASC or MASS or some other groups, and they say, hey, Ted, in some instances, can we put your name in? And in most instances, out of respect, if it's a district that I think I can offer them something, I will do that. But other districts may not be something that I'm really interested in getting in. for a lot of different reasons, and we don't have to go crazy on understanding that. But for a lot of reasons, I may not want to get in there. But when I see something that's a good opportunity, and I think can be a win-win situation, remember I said this would be 8, maybe there's a 9, maybe there's a 10. I'm not done yet. I've got things in pretty good shape at home. In terms of the fix-up and the honey-do list and the projects and this and that. I do carpentry on the side, so we've got things repaired. Pauline is pretty happy with that. So I'm ready to go. I'm ready to jump on the bus again. So this interested me without a question because I kind of know the area, and I know what a regional school district is. I know how they breathe, I know how they eat, how they sleep, how they support their school district and their students. You're no different than myself and my wife when we came forward. So if you need someone with still a little kick left in their quiver, then I'm in. Good luck to you.
Thank you. And on Wednesday of this week, we will be hiring the interim superintendent.
Okay, great. Well,
Thank you so much.
I'm sorry?
Thank you.
Okay. The last piece, simply, as I said in parting the other night, if it's not me, I wish you the best. I'll still keep you on my Christmas list. But I understand in the end, it's a match. Certain things that we say, you may like, other things you say, the heck with that. So there's a variety of reasons for it. But in the end, I do wish you the best. I'm going to be down the road. I'll be reading about you, and I hope things work out for the year, or even shorter if you move forward. There'll be the right person out there in the long run for you, so go get it.
Thank you, and
Thank you
nice
very much.
meeting you.
Nice to meet you.
Take care.